NatRefs Show, a weekly global podcast on sustainable heating and cooling technologies brought to you by Shecco and supported by Teco. My name is Charlotte McLaughlin. I'll be hosting today's show from Brussels, Belgium. I'm the European multimedia reporter of Shecco's industry-leading websites r744.com, hydrocarbons21.com and pneumonia21.com. I'm joined by my colleague from the US, the North American editor of Shecco and editor of Accelerate America, Michael Garry, and Marie Battesti, policy analyst at Shecco. You're both very welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So this week we're focusing on two big stories from the US. One covers the controversy surrounding allegations of lobbying against natural refrigerants by chemical refrigerant companies. The second top story covers the IIAR, who are creating their own standard for hydrocarbons, as well as working with ASHRAE on coming up with a new standard for hydrocarbons. So that's definitely going to be an interesting discussion. We will also hold a small discussion about the attention brought by the general media about cooling. So first of all, let's turn our attention to the top story. The US publication The Intercept says that Chemours asked in a letter to the US Environmental Protection Agency for some help promoting HFO refrigerants against natural refrigerants. And they sort of said that they need support, basically, in promoting HFOs versus natural refrigerants. Now, Michael, you were interviewed by this publication in the US. What was it like being on the other end of the interview?
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, it was interesting. I normally do the interviewing myself. This time I was on the receiving end, but I was proud to represent Shecco and to be able to provide factual information about natural refrigerants.
And can you tell me more about how The Intercept decided to write this story and where they got the information from to confirm that Chemours has been lobbying?
Right. So The Intercept was based their article on a memo that was part of records that had been released by the EPA in response to a Freedom of Information request by the Sierra Club. That memo is now publicly available. And I was able to look at the memo myself online. We have the link in my article. But the interesting thing here is that, Chemours, this memo is basically a message from, or a letter from Chemours requesting a meeting with Scott Pruitt, who, of course, is now the former EPA administrator. And they wanted to discuss what they're doing with respect to HFO production and the moving on from HFCs to HFOs, and they wanted the EPA to realize that this was beneficial to the country and therefore something that the EPA should be supportive of. The idea was that the memo that Chemours sent to the EPA, one part of it talked about continued American leadership is needed. And it said that without leadership from the U.S. to compete in this segment, global competitors can quickly move into position to lead the HFC replacement industry. And, they specifically cited Greenpeace and Shecco, of course, the publisher of our websites. And, they said that Greenpeace and Shecco are promoting the use of natural refrigerants to the exclusion of other solutions. I mean, the reason, of course, we do this is that we feel that's the most environmentally sound and future-proof solution.
Did Chemours give any information why natural refrigerants wouldn't be a long-term solution?
They admitted that natural refrigerants could be preferred for some uses and equipment types, but then they said in many cases it's more expensive for equipment manufacturers than HFO solutions. That's not, of course, always true. It depends. They don't provide any details or examples. And then they said that in some cases, natural refrigerants has poor energy performance, high operating costs, and severe safety risks. So again, this is incorrect. They can always find an example, but they don't cite any examples. And of course, in general, it's totally incorrect. natural refrigerants have excellent energy performance, which lowers operating costs, and the safety risks, if they exist, are well controlled.
Just to come back to their citation of shecco and also of Greenpeace, what is their particular problem? Do they find us to be so much more influential than them? Also Greenpeace to be more influential than them? What is the problem essentially with us focusing on natural refrigerants?
Well, they see it as a competing force, competing with HFOs. So, they're saying, and another thing they mentioned in the memo was that this U.S. leadership and engagement is needed to ensure a, quote, level playing field. So they want a level playing field with natural refrigerants. But the truth is that, as we know, because they're a wealthy and powerful company, that they pretty much dominate the refrigerant market in the U.S. So it's curious that they would, be concerned so much about competing systems like natural refrigerants. But that's what they did. And of course, they're talking to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They did not refer to some of the environmental issues associated with HFOs, such as their degradation, conversion in the atmosphere to trifluoroacetic acid. For its part, EPA declined to comment on the article, but they did point out that the EPA does not issue company-specific endorsements. So,
do you know if Scott Pruitt or anyone from the EPA actually ended up meeting with Chemours?
I believe that they did have this meeting, yes. So this was a letter requesting it. Presumption is that they had the meeting, yes, and they had a specific date for the meeting.
So we don't have confirmation whether.
Well, the article, the Intercept article indicates that they did.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Michael. I encourage everyone to read the article more in depth. If you want more information, and especially to check out our article and then also the Intercept's article. So, Marie, you have been looking over all the sort of cooling related news out there and what's going on. Do you think natural refrigerants are getting a fair coverage in the media? And do you think people are paying attention to cooling enough in the environmental discussions that we're having?
Yeah, so first of all, let's all acknowledge that although I've been seeing here and there a handful of articles about the environmental threat of traditional HFC-based refrigeration and air conditioning equipment, this remains a tiny minority. For example, the nonprofit organization Project for Improved Environmental Coverage published a report titled Environmental Coverage in the Mainstream News and noted that the Kardashians receive nearly 50 times more coverage than ocean acidification, for instance.
That's really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that being said, I was pleasantly surprised this summer to see important and influential news outlets such as The Economist, the BBC, the New York Times, the Washington Post, or, of course, The Intercept with Michael Garry's brilliant interview. The topic of F-gases was probably, at least I have the memory, that it used to be higher on the public agenda in the 2000s, with the ozone layer hole marketed as a health threat due to skin cancer. I remember my president back in the time, Jacques Chirac, saying there is a non-assistance to planet in danger about this issue in its opening speech at the Hague UN Climate Conference in 2000. Indeed, politics were with me since I was in the cradle. But I still have the vivid memory of that. With the Paris Agreement and the national climate targets, sustainable development is now on everybody's lips, it seems, and multinationals' press releases. However, on the HVAC&R side, I mostly see coverage about air conditioning and the energy efficiency issue. So of course this is extremely important, as the air conditioning subsector is indeed quite late in the adoption of natural refrigerants-based technology compared to the refrigeration one. This is mostly due to policy, which for instance in the European Union doesn't drive the AC industry towards natural refrigerants as much as for refrigeration equipment. In addition, the scientific community now all agrees on the skyrocketing demand for AC technology that we can expect in the future, as global warming, an aging population in the West, as well as the rise of middle classes and urbanization in developing countries will progress. Eventually, most articles I read in the mainstream media highlight the problem, but not the solution or opportunity, as if a green, market-ready and energy-efficient alternative didn't exist. Yes, you name it, natural refrigerants or NatRefs seem to be ignored by most stakeholders in the public arena. And that's a pity, as they could help prevent a global average temperature increase of 0.5 degrees by 2100 if widely adopted. So in conclusion, we need more environmental NGOs and journalists tackling the issue. The NatRefs industry is open, very innovative, and eager to share their knowledge. So there's a hook there for your climate pledge.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big issues, even not just in the natural refrigerant industry, but worldwide, is, people need something relatable. They need an idea, or an article has to be related to them. And I think very often so much environmental articles have been very abstract, very scientific. And I think if we go back to what you're saying about the ozone thing, the reason people paid attention to it was because it was linked to skin cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that at least people can understand. It's related to them. It will have an impact on their lives. And I think we have to sort of relate environmental change in the same way. Like you're saying about older people are at more risk if they don't have air conditioning in their homes.
Yeah, and I feel like, we had this massive heat wave all over the world this summer. And I remember I was in my office, at the office, 35 degrees, and seeing on my Twitter feed all those news, like, we need AC, but AC is killing the planet. So I feel like, well, unfortunately, I feel like heat waves are going to be quite standard, and therefore people are going to more realize that there's something, it's just not a luxury, the AC, there's something vital, and there's something like, it's a technology. So of course there's going to be damaging equipment for the planet. So maybe the issue is going to grow.
Yeah, I think we all have to sort of take this on board. Like the environment is not just an abstract issue, it's a people issue, it's our issue, and it's something that we have to tackle all together. So Michael, pretty exciting news from IIAR. They have decided to come up with their own hydrocarbon standards, and they're working with ASHRAE, and they're also going to come up with a separate one as well. Why has this huge ammonia group decided to do this?
Okay, so yes, in terms of this new standard that IIAR is working on, that it is the International Institute of Ammonia Refrigeration. So obviously their main focus historically and still is on ammonia refrigeration. However, in recent months, last few years, IIAR has started to branch out to other natural refrigerant besides ammonia, and that, of course, starting with CO2, carbon dioxide, as a refrigerant. They've been working on a standard for CO2 the last year, and I believe it's going to be presented for comment this January. Hydrocarbons, again, is a natural refrigerant that we're seeing used in chillers, particularly in Europe, other places, not so much in the U.S., but it's definitely looming as a new industrial and commercial refrigerant. So they decided, the board of the IIAR gave its blessing for the group to work with ASHRAE, which of course is another major standards body for refrigeration and air conditioning, to write the safety standard. The reason they're working with ASHRAE is ASHRAE already had a standard within its standard 15 looking at design of these systems. So therefore IIAR decided that it'll address the gaps in that standard.
Do we know how these standards will interact with other codes and standards, like national codes, local codes, also standards by other organizations like the UL and EPA and stuff?
Well, yeah, they have a huge impact on the codes, that the building codes and safety codes that are used in everyday construction and maintenance of buildings. So yeah, they look to IIAR and ASHRAE for direction when writing writing and enforcing the local building standards that everybody has to abide by. So yeah, these have a huge effect.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks, Michael, for your time, and thanks to Marie for her contributions about the wider media coverage paid to natural refrigerants in the cooling sector. We have just one last thing to add. Tomorrow is Atmosphere Asia. It's taking place in Singapore. Probably too late now to register for tickets, but I think that pay attention to the coverage that's happening on the ground by our colleagues in the Asia Pacific region and our social media to keep up to date with the conference. Well, thanks very much, and this brings this week's podcast to a close. Thanks for listening, and don't forget that in 2 weeks' time, we'll have another great NatRefs show.